The Call of the Wild. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Call of the Wild by Robert W. Service. From Spell of the Yukon. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 7. Have you gazed on naked grandeur where there's nothing else to gaze on? Set pieces and drop curtain scenes galore? Big mountains heaved to heaven, which the blinding sunsets blazon, black canyons where the rapids rip and roar? Have you swept the visioned valley with the green stream streaking through it, searched the vastness for a something you have lost? Have you strung your soul to silence? Then for God's sake go and do it. Hear the challenge, learn the lesson, pay the cost. Have you wandered in the wilderness, the sagebrush desolation, the bunchgrass levels where the cattle graze? Have you whistled bits of ragtime at the end of all creation, and learnt to know the desert's little ways? Have you camped upon the foothills? Have you galloped o'er the ranges? Have you roamed the arid sunlands through and through? Have you chummed up with the mesa? Do you know its moods and changes? Then listen to the wild, it's calling you. Have you known the great white silence, not a snow-gemmed twig a-quiver? Eternal truths that shame our soothing lies. Have you broken trail on snowshoes, mushed your huskies up the river, dared the unknown, led the way, and clutched the prize? Have you marked the map's void spaces, mingled with the mongrel races, felt the savage strength of brute in every thew? And though grim as hell the worst is, can you round it off with curses? Then hearken to the wild, it's wanting you. Have you suffered, starved, and triumphed, grovelled down, yet grasped at glory, grown bigger in the bigness of the whole? Done things just for the doing, letting babblers tell the story, seeing through the nice veneer the naked soul? Have you seen God in his splendors, heard the text that nature renders? You'll never hear it in the family pew. The simple things, the true things, the silent men who do things, then listen to the wild, it's calling you. They have cradled you in custom, they have primed you with their preaching, they have soaked you in convention through and through. They have put you in a showcase, you're a credit to their teaching, but can't you hear the wild, it's calling you. Let us probe the silent places, let us seek what luck betide us, let us journey to a lonely land I know. There's a whisper on the night wind, there's a star agleam to guide us, and the wild is calling, calling, let us go. End of The Call of the Wild by Robert W. Service.
The City of Elephants, which is governed by the great god of idleness who lives on the top of a hill. The history of 3 great discoveries and the naughty children of Iquique. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patrick Wallace. The City of Elephants, which is governed by the great god of idleness who lives on the top of a hill. The history of 3 great discoveries and the naughty children of Iquique. Letter number 3 in From Sea to Sea by Rudyard Kipling. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 7. I built my soul a lordly pleasure house, wherein at ease for aye to dwell. I said, O soul, make merry and carouse, dear soul, for all is well. So much for making definite programs of travel beforehand. In my first letter, I told you that I would go from Rangoon to Penang direct. Now we are lying off Moulmein in a new steamer which does not seem to run anywhere in particular. Why she should go to Moulmein is a mystery, but as every soul on the ship is a loafer like myself, no one is discontented. Imagine a shipload of people to whom time is no object, who have no desires beyond 3 meals a day, and no emotions save those caused by a casual cockroach. Moulmein is situated up the mouth of a river which ought to flow through South America, and all manner of dissolute native craft appear to make the place their home. Ugly cargo steamers that the initiated call Geordie tramps grunt and bellow at the beautiful hills all around, and the pot-bellied British India liners wallow down the reaches. Visitors are rare in Moulmein, so rare that few but cargo boats think it worth their while to come off from the shore. Strictly in confidence, I will tell you that Moulmein is not a city of this earth at all. Sinbad the sailor visited it, if you recollect, on that memorable voyage when he discovered the burial ground of the elephants. As the steamer came up the river, we were aware of first one elephant and then another hard at work in timber yards that faced the shore. A few narrow-minded folk with binoculars said that there were mahouts upon their backs, but this was never clearly proven. I prefer to believe in what I saw. A sleepy town, just one house thick, scattered along a lovely stream and inhabited by slow, solemn elephants, building stockades for their own diversion. There was a strong scent of freshly sawn teak in the air. We could not see any elephants sawing, and occasionally the warm stillness was broken by the crash of the log. When the elephants had got an appetite for luncheon, they loafed off in couples to their club, and did not take the trouble to give us greeting and the latest mail papers, at which we were much disappointed, but took heart when we saw upon a hill a large white pagoda surrounded by scores of little pagodas. "This," we said with one voice, "is the place to make an excursion to," and then shuddered at our own profanity, for above all things we did not wish to behave like mere vulgar tourists. The tikagaris at Moulmein are 3 sizes smaller than those of Rangoon, as the ponies are no bigger than decent sheep. Their drivers trot them up hill and down, and as the gharry is extremely narrow and the roads are anything but good, the exercise is refreshing. Here again all the drivers are Madrasis. I should better remember what that pagoda was like had I not fallen deeply and irrevocably in love with a Burmese girl at the foot of the first flight of steps. Only the fact of the steamer starting next noon prevented me from staying at Moulmein for ever and owning a pair of elephants. These are so common that they wander about the streets and, I make no doubt, could be obtained for a piece of sugar cane. Leaving this far too lovely maiden, I went up the steps only a few yards, and, turning me round, looked upon a view of water, island, broad river, fair grazing ground, and belted wood that made me rejoice that I was alive. The hillside, below me and above me, was ablaze with pagodas, from a gorgeous golden and vermilion beauty to a delicate grey stone one just completed in honour of an eminent priest lately deceased at Mandalay. Far above my head there was a faint tinkle, as of golden bells, and a talking of the breezes in the tops of the toddy palms. Wherefore I climbed higher and higher up the steps till I reached a place of great peace, dotted with Burmese images, spotlessly clean. Here women now and again paid reverence. They bowed their heads and their lips moved because they were praying. I had an umbrella, a black one, in my hand, deck shoes upon my feet, and a helmet upon my head. I did not pray. I swore at myself for being a globe-trotter, and wished that I had enough Burmese to explain to these ladies that I was sorry, and would have taken off my hat but for the sun. A globe-trotter is a brute. I had the grace to blush as I tramped round the pagoda. That will be remembered to me for righteousness. But I stared horribly at a golden red sign temple with a beautifully gilt image of Buddha in it, at the grim figures in the niche at the base of the main pagoda, at the little palms that grew out of the cracks in the tiled paving of the court, at the big palms above, and at the low-hung bronze bells that stood at each corner for the women to smite with stag horns. Upon one bell rang this amazing triplet in English, evidently the composition of the caster who completed his work, and now let us hope has reached Nibbana, 35 years ago. He who destroyed this bell, they must be in the great hell, spelt with one L, and unable to coming out. I respect a man who is not able to spell hell properly. It shows that he has been brought up in an amiable creed. You who come to Moulmein, treat this bell with respect, and refrain from playing with it, for that hurts the feelings of the worshippers. In the base of the pagoda were 4 rooms, lined as to 3 sides with colossal plaster figures, before each of whom burned one solitary dip, whose rays fought with the flood of evening sunshine that came through the windows, and the room was filled with a pale yellow light, unearthly to stand in. Occasionally a woman crept into one of these rooms to pray, but nearly all the company stayed in the courtyard. But those that faced the figures prayed more zealously than the others, so I judged that their troubles were the greater. Of the actual cult I knew less than nothing, for the neatly bound English books that we read make no mention of pointing red-tipped straws at a golden image, or of the banging of bells after the custom of worshippers in a Hindu temple. It must be a genial one, however. To begin with, it is quiet and carried on among the fairest possible surroundings that ever landscape offered. In this particular case, the massive white pagoda shot into the blue from the west of a walled hill that commanded 4 separate and desirable views as you looked either at the steamer and the river below, the polished silver reaches to the left, the woods to the right, or the roofs of Moulmein to the landward. Between each pause of the rustling of dresses and the low-toned talk of the women fell, from far above, the tinkle of innumerable metal leaves which were stirred by the breeze as they hung from the tee of the pagoda. A golden image winked in the sun. The painted one stared straight in front of them over the heads of the worshippers, and somewhere below a mallet and a plane were lazily helping to build yet another pagoda in honour of the Lord of the Earth. Sitting in meditation while the professor went round with a sacrilegious camera to the vast terror of the Burmese youth, I made 2 notable discoveries, and nearly went to sleep over them. The first was that the Lord of the Earth is Idleness, thick slab idleness with a little religion stirred in to keep it sweet. And the second was that the shape of the pagoda came originally from a bulging toddy palm trunk. There was one between me and the far-off skyline, and it exactly duplicated the outlines of a small grey stone building. Yet a third discovery, and a much more important one, came to me later on. A dirty little imp of a boy ran by, clothed more or less in a beautifully worked silk putso, the like of which I had in vain attempted to secure at Rangoon. A bystander told me that such an article would cost 110 rupees, exactly 10 rupees in excess of the price demanded at Rangoon, when I had been discourteous to a pretty Burmese girl with diamonds in her ears, and had treated her as though she were a Delhi box-wallah. "Professor," said I, when the camera spidered round the corner, "there is something wrong with this people. They won't work, they aren't all dacoits, and their babies run around with 100 rupees putsos on them, while their parents speak the truth. How in the world do they get a living?" "They exist beautifully," said the Professor, "and I only brought half a dozen plates with me. I shall come again in the morning with some more. Did I ever dream of a place like this?" "No," said I, "it's perfect, and for the life of me I can't quite see where the precise charm lies." "In its beastly laziness," said the Professor as he packed the camera, and we went away, regretfully, haunted by the voices of many wind-blown bells. Not 10 minutes from the pagoda we saw a real British bandstand, a shanty labelled Municipal Office, a collection of PWD bungalows that in vain strove to blast the landscape, and a Madras band. I had never seen Madrasi troops before. They seem to dress just like Tommies and have an air of much culture and refinement. It is said that they read English books and know all about their rights and privileges. For further details apply to the Pegu Club, second table from the top on the right-hand side as you enter. In an evil hour I attempted to revive the drooping trade of Moulmein, and to this end bound a native of the place to come on board the steamer next morn with a collection of Burmese silks. It was only a 5 minutes' pull, and he could have sat in the stern all the while. Morning came, but not the man. Not a boat of watermelons, pink fleshy watermelons, neared the ship. We might have been in quarantine. As we slipped down the river on our way to Penang, I saw the elephants playing with the teak logs as solemnly and as mysteriously as ever. They were the chief inhabitants, and for aught I know, the rulers of the place. Their lethargy had corrupted the town, and when the Professor wished to photograph them, I believe they went away in scorn. We're now running down to Penang with the thermometer 87 degrees in the cabins and anything you please on deck. We have exhausted all our literature, drunk 200 lemon squashes, played 40 different games of cards, patience mostly, organised a lottery on the run, Had it been 1,000 rupees instead of 10, I shouldn't have won it, and slept 17 hours out of the 24. It is perfectly impossible to write, but you may be morally the better for the story of the bad people of Iquique, which, as you have not before heard, I will now proceed to relate. It has just been told me by a German orchid hunter, fresh from nearly losing his head in the Lushai Hills, who has been over most of the world. Iquique is somewhere in South America, at the back of or beyond Brazil, and once upon a time there came to it a tribe of aborigines from out of the woods, so innocent that they wore nothing at all, absolutely nothing at all. They had a grievance, but no garments, and the former they came to lay before His Excellency the Governor of Iquique. But the news of their coming and their exceeding nakedness had gone before them, and good Spanish ladies of the town agreed that the heathen should first of all be clothed. So they organised a sewing bee, and the result, which was mainly aprons, was served out to the bad people with hints as to its use. Nothing could have been better. They appeared in their aprons before the governor, and all the ladies of Iquique ranged on the steps of the cathedral, only to find that the governor could not grant their demands. And you know what these children of nature did? In the twinkling of an eye they had off those aprons, slung them round their necks, and were dancing naked as the dawn before the scandalized ladies of Iquique, who fled with their fans before their eyes into the sanctuary of the cathedral. And when the steps were deserted, the bad people withdrew, shouting and leaping, their aprons still around their necks, for good cloth is valuable property. They encamped near the town, knowing their own power. It was impossible to send the military against them, and equally impossible that donnas and senoritas should be exposed to the chance of being shocked whenever they went abroad. No one knew at what hour the bad people would sweep through the streets. Their demands were therefore granted, and Iquique had rest. Nuda est veritas, et prevalebit. But, said I, what is there so awful in a naked Indian, or 200 naked Indians for that matter? My friend, said the German, they was Indians of South America. I tell you, they do not themselves strip well. I put my hand on my mouth and went away. End of The City of Elephants, which is governed by the great god of idleness who lives on the top of a hill. The history of 3 great discoveries and the naughty children of Iquique. Letter number 3 in From Sea to Sea by Rudyard Kipling. Read by Patrick Wallace. The Donkey, the Pack, and the Pack Saddle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patrick Wallace. The Donkey, the Pack, and the Pack Saddle from Travels with a Donkey in the Cevennes by Robert Louis Stevenson. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection number 7. In a little place called Le Monastier, in a pleasant highland valley 15 miles from Le Puy, I spent about a month of fine days. Monastier is notable for the making of lace, for drunkenness, for freedom of language, and for unparalleled political dissension. There are adherents of each of the 4 French parties, Legitimists, Orleanists, Imperialists, and Republicans, in this little mountain town, and they all hate, loathe, decry, and calumniate each other. Except for business purposes, or to give each other the lie in a tavern brawl, they have laid aside even the civility of speech. 'Tis a mere mountain Poland. In the midst of this Babylon I found myself a rallying point. Everyone was anxious to be kind and helpful to the stranger. This was not merely from the natural hospitality of mountain people, nor even from the surprise with which I was regarded as a man living of his own free will in Le Monastier, when he might just as well have lived anywhere else in this big world. It arose a good deal from my projected excursion southward through the Cevennes. A traveller of my sort was a thing hitherto unheard of in that district. I was looked upon with contempt, like a man who should project a journey to the moon, but yet with a respectful interest, like one setting forth for the inclement pole. All were ready to help in my preparations, A crowd of sympathizers supported me at the critical moment of a bargain. Not a step was taken, but was heralded by glasses round and celebrated by a dinner or a breakfast. It was already hard upon October before I was ready to set forth, and at the high altitudes over which my road lay there was no Indian summer to be looked for. I was determined, if not to camp out, at least to have the means of camping out in my possession. For there is nothing more harassing to an easy mind than the necessity of reaching shelter by dusk, and the hospitality of a village inn is not always to be reckoned sure by those who trudge on foot. A tent, above all for a solitary traveller, is troublesome to pitch and troublesome to strike again, and even on the march it forms a conspicuous feature in your baggage. A sleeping sack, on the other hand, is always ready. You have only to get into it. It serves a double purpose, a bed by night, a portmanteau by day, and it does not advertise your intention of camping out to every curious passer-by. This is a huge point. If a camp is not secret, it is but a troubled resting place. You become a public character. The convivial rustic visits your bedside after an early supper, and you must sleep with one eye open and be up before the day. I decided on a sleeping sack, and after repeated visits to Le Puy and a deal of high living for myself and my advisers, a sleeping sack was designed, constructed, and triumphantly brought home. This child of my invention was nearly 6 feet square, exclusive of 2 triangular flaps to serve as a pillow by night, and as the top and bottom of the sack by day. I call it the sack, but it was never a sack by more than courtesy. Only a sort of long roll or sausage, green waterproof cart-cloth without, and blue sheep's fur within. It was commodious as a valise, warm and dry for a bed. There was luxurious turning room for one, and at a pinch the thing might serve for 2. I could bury myself in it up to the neck. For my head I trusted to a fur cap with a hood to fold down over my ears and a band to pass under my nose like a respirator. And in case of heavy rain I proposed to make myself a little tent, or tentlet, with my waterproof coat, 3 stones, and a bent branch. It will readily be conceived that I could not carry this huge package on my own, merely human, shoulders. It remained to choose a beast of burden. Now, a horse is a fine lady among animals, flighty, timid, delicate in eating, of tender health. He is too valuable and too restive to be left alone, so that you are chained to your brute as to a fellow galley slave. A dangerous road puts him out of his wits. In short, he's an uncertain and exacting ally, and adds 30-fold to the troubles of the voyager. What I required was something cheap and small and hardy, and of a stolid and peaceful temper, and all these requisites pointed to a donkey. There dwelt an old man in Monastier, of rather unsound intellect according to some, much followed by street boys, and known to fame as Father Adam. Father Adam had a cart, and to draw the cart a diminutive she-ass, not much bigger than a dog, the colour of a mouse, with a kindly eye and a determined underjaw. There was something neat and high-bred, a Quakerish elegance about the rogue that hit my fancy on the spot. Our first interview was in Monastier market-place. To prove her good temper, one child after another was set upon her back to ride, and one after another went head over heels into the air, until a want of confidence began to reign in youthful bosoms, and the experiment was discontinued from a dearth of subjects. I was already backed by a deputation of my friends, but as if this were not enough, all the buyers and sellers came round and helped me in the bargain, and the ass and I and Father Adam were the centre of a hubbub for near half an hour. At length she passed into my service for the consideration of 65 francs and a glass of brandy. The sack had already cost 80 francs and 2 glasses of beer, so that Modestine, as I instantly baptized her, was upon all accounts the cheaper article. Indeed, that was as it should be, for she was only an appurtenance of my mattress, or self-acting bedstead on 4 casters. I had a last interview with Father Adam in a billiard-room at the witching hour of dawn, when I administered the brandy. He professed himself greatly touched by the separation, and declared he had often bought white bread for the donkey when he'd been content with black bread for himself. But this, according to the best authorities, must have been a flight of fancy. He had a name in the village for brutally misusing the ass. Yet it is certain that he shed a tear, and the tear made a clean mark down one cheek. By the advice of a fallacious local saddler, a leather pad was made for me with rings to fasten on my bundle, and I thoughtfully completed my kit and arranged my toilette. By way of armoury and utensils, I took a revolver, a little spirit lamp and pan, a lantern and some halfpenny candles, a jackknife, and a large leather flask. The main cargo consisted of 2 entire changes of warm clothing, besides my travelling wear of country velveteen, pilot coat, and knitted spencer, some books, and my railway rug, which, being also in the form of a bag, made me a double castle for cold nights. The permanent larder was represented by cakes of chocolate and tins of Bellona sausage. All this, except what I carried about my person, was easily stowed into the sheepskin bag, and by good fortune I threw in my empty knapsack, rather for convenience of carriage than from any thought that I should want it on my journey. For more immediate needs I took a leg of cold mutton, a bottle of Beaujolais, an empty bottle to carry milk, an egg beater, and a considerable quantity of black bread and white, like Father Adam for myself and donkey, only in my scheme of things the destinations were reversed. Monastrians of all shades of thought in politics had agreed in threatening me with many ludicrous misadventures, and with sudden death in many surprising forms. Cold, wolves, robbers, above all the nocturnal practical joker, were daily and eloquently forced on my attention. Yet in these vaticinations the true patent danger was left out. Like Christian, it was from my pack I suffered by the way. Before telling my own mishaps, let me in 2 words relate the lesson of my experience. If the pack is well strapped at the ends and hung at full length, not doubled for your life, across the pack saddle, the traveller is safe. The saddle will certainly not fit, such is the imperfection of our transitory life. It will assuredly topple and tend to overset. But there are stones on every roadside, and a man soon learns the art of correcting any tendency to overbalance with a well-adjusted stone. On the day of my departure I was up a little after 5. By 6 we began to load the donkey, and 10 minutes after my hopes were in the dust. The pad would not stay on Modestine's back for half a moment. I returned it to its maker, with whom I had so contumelious a passage that the street outside was crowded from wall to wall with gossips looking on and listening. The pad changed hands with much vivacity. Perhaps it would be more descriptive to say that we threw it at each other's heads, and at any rate we were very warm and unfriendly, and spoke with a deal of freedom. I had a common donkey pack-saddle, a barde as they call it, fitted upon Modestine, and once more loaded her with my effects. The doubled sack, my pilot coat, for it was warm and I was to walk in my waistcoat, a great bar of black bread and an open basket containing the white bread, the mutton and the bottles, were all corded together in a very elaborate system of knots, and I looked on the result with fatuous content. In such a monstrous deck cargo, all poised above the donkey's shoulders, with nothing below to balance, on a brand new pack saddle that had not yet been worn to fit the animal, and fastened with brand new girths that might be expected to stretch and slacken by the way, even a very careless traveller should have seen disaster brewing. That elaborate system of knots, again, was the work of too many sympathizers to be very artfully designed. It is true they tightened the cords with a will. As many as 3 at a time would have a foot against Modestine's quarters and be hauling with clenched teeth. But I learned afterwards that one thoughtful person, without any exercise of force, can make a more solid job than half a dozen heated and enthusiastic grooms. I was then but a novice. Even after the misadventure of the pad, nothing could disturb my security, and I went forth from the stable door as an ox goeth to the slaughter. End of The Donkey, the Pack, and the Pack Saddle by Robert Louis Stevenson. Read by Patrick Wallace.
Early Transportation on the Mississippi. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Anderson. Early Transportation on the Mississippi by H. E. Hoagland. A selection from the Journal of Political Economy, Volume 19, Number 2, February 1911. The only means of water transportation with which the Indian of the Mississippi Valley was equipped before the influence of the Frenchman was felt in the West were canoes made of logs, birch bark, or buffalo skins. The birch bark canoe obtained from the Indian, or constructed according to his pattern, meant much to the early Frenchman in the Western Valley. Important as it was to the explorer, however, its limited capacity prevented its permanent use by the trader. As soon as increased settlement made commerce possible, fire and stone axes gave place to iron tools, and larger and better boats supplanted the canoes. The earliest improvement on the canoe was the pirogue, which was first used extensively by the early French traders. Like the log canoe, the pirogue was constructed from the solid trunk of a tree, the sycamore being the tree most often used for this purpose. The method of construction was as follows. After the trunk of the tree had been hollowed out, the canoe thus formed was split along its entire length as nearly in the middle as possible. Then a broad, flat piece of timber was inserted between these halves, and the ends were fitted with similar planks. The chinks were plastered up with clay or filled with gum resin. As this pirogue presented the same objections as the log canoe, being heavy, unwieldy, and having flat ends, which met with great resistance from the water, it was further modified in time into the form of a bateau. This change was brought about by tapering the ends. Sometimes the middle was widened like a large skiff. The tapered ends, together with the use of lighter timbers, made the bateau much more easy to handle than the pirogue. When operated by only 2 men, it was usually managed with paddles and setting poles. Some of the larger ones were supplied with oars and were rowed by 18 or 20 men, and in a few instances the bateau had a mast and a lug or sort of square sail which could be set when the wind favored. These pirogues and bateaux answered the early demand of local commerce. But for longer journeys, where increased dangers were to be met with, and where it was not profitable to carry small cargoes, larger and more durable boats were needed. This need was met temporarily by the enlargement of the bateau and by improvements in their plan of construction. In order to give greater height and width to the bateau, slabs of timber were sometimes added to the sides, and several planks instead of one were inserted into the bottom of the boat. These were at first stitched in by means of cords or sinews. Gradually, as the number of side planks increased, the solid hull diminished and finally dwindled into a bottom board or keel at the bottom of the boat, its only purpose being to serve as a centerpiece upon which the sides of the vessel were built. Hence the name given to this form, the keel boat. Finally, the framework of vertical ribs was added to the interior and fastened to the planks of the sides by cords. These cords were later replaced by wooden pins, which in their turn gave way to iron nails or small bolts. These Mississippi keel boats developed into a form 40 to 60 feet long and 7 to 10 feet wide. They were sharp at both ends, with flat bottoms, and drew only about 2 feet of water. This made it possible to navigate them near the shore in going against the current of the stream, where the counter currents or eddies could be made use of to aid in the progress of the boat. When they had no roof, they were fitted with a narrow gangway just above the gunwale, for the use of the boatmen as they poled or warped up the stream. Sometimes something like a large box was raised over the boat. This served for a cover and left a narrow footpath on the outside all around. In descending the river, these boats required but one hand to steer and four to row. The steersman plied a long oar which served as a rudder. To ascend the stream, more hands were needed in order to pole the boat against the current. The poles used for this purpose were iron tipped and at least 8 feet long. The upward journey was a laborious one, progress being only about 8 or 10 miles per day. Occasionally a better system of propulsion was employed. Fortesque Cumming, who made a tour down the Mississippi, made note of a keelboat propelled by horse power. "A keel of 40 tons came to the landing at the same time we did. She was worked by a horizontal wheel, kept in motion by 6 horses, going round in a circle on a gallery above the boat, by which are turned 2 cog wheels fixed each to an axle which projects over the gunwales of the boat, one before, the other behind the horizontal wheel. 8 paddles are fixed on the projecting ends of each axle, which propel the boat 5 or 6 miles an hour. 7 horses died during the voyage, and he had only 2 remaining of the first set he commenced with." The next change in the keelboat was not so much a change in its form as in the method of propelling it. The new form, constructed with a hull similar to that of the older type, had 2 masts and was provided with sails. Such a boat was called a barge. The advantages of the sail barge are easily understood when it is borne in mind that on the lower Mississippi during the summer there is always a south or southwest wind for 9 or 10 hours during the day, commencing about 8 o'clock in the morning. These barges were steered by a rudder and were easily managed when they were making good progress with a strong wind, but when they were descending the river with the force of the current alone, they were not so easily managed as was the keelboat with a long steering oar. In case the wind was not favorable when ascending the stream, the navigation of these barges depended chiefly upon the use of the tow line. Leaving for a time the discussion of boats evolved from the canoe, we turn to a consideration of rafts and their modifications. It is evident that the idea of a raft would be as easily suggested to the mind of the savage as would that of the dugout canoe. Yet rafts were not in general use by the Indians of the Mississippi Valley at the time of its discovery by the Europeans. It was not until settlements had been made at New Orleans and at other points in the lower part of this great valley that this means of transportation became common. As soon as such settlements were made, many of the early comers to the timber regions bordering the Mississippi and its tributaries employed themselves and their slaves in the autumn in cutting down and squaring timber for sawing into boards and scantling. These squared timbers were made into rafts and floated down the various feeders of the Mississippi, thence to be carried to New Orleans or some other downriver settlement. Many such settlers constructed their own water power sawmills or became partners in a neighborhood sawmill, which they put to good use during the period of high water. Large quantities of this lumber were rafted to New Orleans, there to be loaded upon ocean vessels for shipment to the West Indies or to other markets. This trade in lumber alone was profitable, but it was early seen that these rafts could be made to carry more than their own weight. Consequently, they were loaded with skins, produce, and peltries. This method of marketing other produce than lumber was not followed long. Modifications were made in the rafts to accommodate loose articles. One of the first of these was the lashing of 2 pirogues together to serve as a sort of foundation upon which was constructed a platform of planks or timbers. Besides the deck thus formed for the deposit of articles bound for market, the boatmen had covered stowage in each of the pirogues. Experience soon taught those who made use of the ordinary raft, or of the form just described, that with the dip of the raft in eddies, or with shock which the raft received whenever it came in contact with snags or hidden boulders, much of the cargo would be precipitated into the river. In order to prevent this, rude sides a few feet high were fastened to the raft. Here we have the first form of the flatboat or broadhorn. As Claiborne has said in the description of these craft, the only claim of the flatboat or broadhorn to rank as a vessel was due to the fact that it floated upon the water and was used as a vehicle of transportation. At first these boats were constructed without nails, the parts being fastened together with thongs or wooden pins. This made their use dangerous to the boatmen and hazardous to their cargoes, because of the risk of their breaking up when they came in contact with the bank of the stream, or with any obstacle to the progress of the boat. The material used in the construction of the early flatboats differed but little from that used in the construction of the ordinary rafts. They have been compared in form to a log house with a puncheon floor, and with the roof and all but a few feet of the walls removed. Much grain and many small articles were lost whenever the water washed the plaster away from the chinks in the floor and in the low sides. The appearance of these boats was anything but graceful. They were usually about 60 feet long and 20 feet wide. Their awkward shape and great size made them so unmanageable that an early traveler has undoubtedly expressed the truth when he says that only the strong arm of a backwoodsman could keep them from running upon planters, sawyers, wooden islands, and all the scillas and Charybdis that are to be found with on the voyage. They were used to carry all sorts of bulky cargoes, including livestock and produce, and slaves as well. The following quotation, taken from the account of a voyage down the Mississippi, gives some idea of the nature of the heterogeneous cargoes. Quote, "We found numbers of them along the Ohio, detained by low water, and from St. Louis down to New Orleans, sometimes 15, 20, and 30 together. One of the flatboats is from the upper Ohio, laden with pine boards, planks, rye, whiskey, and flour. Close to it another from the falls of the Ohio, with corn in the ear and bulk, apples and peaches. A third with hemp, tobacco, and cotton. In the fourth you may find horses regularly stabled together. In the next, cattle from the mouth of the Missouri. A sixth will have hogs, poultry, turkeys, and in a seventh you see, peeping out of the holes, the woolly heads of slaves, transported from Virginia and Kentucky to the human flesh mart at New Orleans. They have come thousands of miles and still have to proceed 1,000 more before they arrive at their place of destination." The flatboat traffic, except that of the lower Mississippi, was confined to a few months in the year. The boats could float down the rivers only during the season of high water. Traffic was confined to the downriver trade, as none of these craft ever attempted to go up the stream. They were generally broken up at their destination, and the lumber of which they were made was sold for building purposes or for fuel. Whenever the market for the sale of such lumber was flooded, the boats were abandoned after they had been divested of their produce. Some were used by boat companies and by merchants to aid in the construction of their rude levees and wharves. End of Early Transportation on the Mississippi by H.E. Hoagland.
Hearts and Hands. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. Hearts and Hands, from Waifs and Strays by O. Henry. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 7. At Denver there was an influx of passengers into the coaches on the eastbound B&M Express. In one coach there sat a very pretty young woman, dressed in elegant taste, and surrounded by all the luxurious comforts of an experienced traveler. Among the newcomers were two young men, one of handsome presence, with a bold, frank countenance and manner, the other a ruffled, glum-faced person, heavily built and roughly dressed. The two were handcuffed together. As they passed down the aisle of the coach, the only vacant seat offered was a reversed one, facing the attractive young woman. Here the linked couple seated themselves. The young woman's glance fell upon them with a distant, swift disinterest. Then, with a lovely smile brightening her countenance, and a tender pink tingeing her rounded cheeks, she held out a little gray-gloved hand. When she spoke, her voice, full, sweet, and deliberate, proclaimed that its owner was accustomed to speak and be heard. "Well, Mr. Easton, if you will make me speak first, I suppose I must. Don't you ever recognize old friends when you meet them in the West?" The younger man roused himself sharply at the sound of her voice, seemed to struggle with a slight embarrassment, which he threw off instantly, and then clasped her fingers with his left hand. "It's Miss Fairchild," he said, with a smile. "I'll ask you to excuse the other hand. It's otherwise engaged just at the present." He slightly raised his right hand, bound at the wrist by the shining bracelet, to the left one of his companion. The glad look in the girl's eyes slowly changed to a bewildered horror. The glow faded from her cheeks. Her lips parted in a vague, relaxing distress. Easton, with a little laugh, as if amused, was about to speak again when the other forestalled him. The glum-faced man had been watching the girl's countenance with veiled glances from his keen, shrewd eyes. "You'll excuse me for speaking, miss, but I see you're acquainted with the marshal here. If you'll ask him to speak a word for me when we get to the pen, he'll do it, and it'll make things easier for me there. He's taken me to Leavenworth prison. It's 7 years for counterfeiting." "Oh," said the girl, with a deep breath and returning color. "So that is what you are doing out here? A marshal?" "My dear Miss Fairchild," said Easton calmly, "I had to do something. Money has a way of taking wings unto itself, and you know it takes money to keep step with our crowd in Washington. I saw this opening in the West, and, well, a marshalship isn't quite as high a position as that of ambassador, but—" "The ambassador," said the girl, warmly, "doesn't call any more. He needn't ever have done so. You ought to know that. And so now you are one of these dashing Western heroes, and you ride and shoot and go into all kinds of dangers. That's different from the Washington life. You have been missed from the old crowd." The girl's eyes, fascinated, went back, widened a little, to rest upon the glittering handcuffs. "Don't you worry about them, miss," said the other man. "All marshals handcuff themselves to their prisoners to keep them from getting away. Mr. Easton knows his business." "Will we see you again soon in Washington?" asked the girl. "Not soon, I think," said Easton. "My butterfly days are over, I fear." "I love the West," said the girl, irrelevantly. Her eyes were shining softly. She looked away out the car window. She began to speak truly and simply, without the gloss of style and manner. "Mamma and I spent the summer in Denver. She went home a week ago because Father was slightly ill. I could live and be happy in the West. I think the air here agrees with me. Money isn't everything, but people always misunderstand things and remain stupid." "Say, Mr. Marshall," growled the glum-faced man, "this isn't quite fair. I'm needing a drink, and haven't had a smoke all day. Haven't you talked long enough? Take me in the smoker now, won't you? I'm half dead for a pipe." The bound travelers rose to their feet, Easton with the same slow smile on his face. "I can't deny a petition for tobacco," he said lightly. "It's the one friend of the unfortunate. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Duty calls, you know." He held out his hand for a farewell. "It's too bad you are not going East," she said, reclothing herself with manner and style. "But you must go on to Leavenworth, I suppose." "Yes," said Easton, "I must go on to Leavenworth." The two men sidled down the aisle into the smoker. The two passengers in the seat near by had heard most of the conversation. Said one of them, "That Marshall's a good sort of chap. Some of these Western fellows are all right." "Pretty young to hold an office like that, isn't he?" asked the other. "Young!" exclaimed the first speaker. "Why, oh, didn't you catch on? Say, did you ever know an officer to handcuff a prisoner to his right hand?" End of Hearts and Hands by O. Henry. Recording by Bill Mosley, Bernardo, Texas, USA.
The Horseback Ride. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. The Horseback Ride by Sarah Jane Lippincott. From In the Saddle, a collection of poems on horseback riding. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 7. The Horseback Ride. When troubled in spirit, when weary of life, when I faint 'neath its burdens and shrink from its strife, when its fruits turn to ashes, are mocking my taste, and its fairest scene seems but a desolate waste, then come ye not near me, my sad heart to cheer, with friendship's soft accents or sympathy's tear. No pity I ask, and no counsel I need, but bring me, oh, bring me my gallant young steed, with his high arched neck and his nostrils spread wide, his eye full of fire and his step full of pride. As I spring to his back, as I seize the strong rein, the strength to my spirit returneth again. The bonds are all broken that fettered my mind, and my cares borne away on the wings of the wind. My pride lifts its head for a season bowed down, and the queen in my nature now puts on her crown. Now we're off, like the winds to the plains whence they came, and the rapture of motion is thrilling my frame. On speeds my courser, scarce printing the sod, scarce crushing a daisy to mark where he trod. On like a deer, when the hound's early bay awakes the wild echoes, away and away. Still faster, still farther, he leaps at my cheer, till the rush of the startled air whirs in my ear. Now long a clear rivulet lieth his track, see his glancing hoofs tossing the white pebbles back. Now a glen dark as midnight, what matter, we'll down, though shadows are round us, and rocks o'er us frown. The thick branches shake us, we're hurrying through, and deck us with spangles of silvery dew. What a wild thought of triumph, that this girlish hand such a steed in the might of his strength may command! What a glorious creature! Ah, glance at him now, as I check him awhile on this green hillock's brow. How he tosses his mane with a shrill joyous neigh, and paws the firm earth in his proud stately play. Hurrah! Off again, dashing on as in ire, till the long flinty pathway is flashing with fire. Ho! A ditch! Shall we pause? No, the bold leap we dare. Like a swift winged arrow we rush through the air. Oh, not all the pleasures that poets may praise, not the wildering waltz in the ballroom's blaze, nor the chivalrous joust, nor the daring race, nor the swift regatta, nor merry chase, nor the sail high heaving waters o'er, nor the rural dance on the moonlight shore, can the wild and thrilling joy exceed of a fearless leap on a fiery steed. End of the Horseback Ride by Sarah Jane Lippincott. Read by Ginger Kukalo.
In the Train by Robert Lind. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosie. In the Train from The Pleasures of Ignorance by Robert Lind.
It is said that traveling by train is to be made still more uncomfortable. I doubt if there is a man of sufficient genius in the government to accomplish this. Are not the trains already merely elongated buses without the racing instincts of the bus? Have they not already learned to crawl past mile after mile of backyard and back garden at such a snail's pace that we have come to know, like an old friend, every disreputable garment hung out on the clotheslines of a score of suburbs? Do they not stand still at the most unreasonable places with the obstinacy of an ass? Stations, the names of which used to be an indistinguishable blur as we swept past them on a swallow's wing, have now become a part of the known world, and have as much attention paid to them as though they were Paris or Vienna. Equality has not yet been established among men, but it has been established among stations. There never was such a democracy of frightfulness. We seldom see a station which has about it the air of permanence. There are, I believe, good historical reasons why there are no Tudor stations or Queen Anne stations to be found in the country. Still, I know of no reason why so many stations should look as though they had been built hurriedly to serve the needs of a month, like a travelling show in a piece of waste ground. Not that the railway station has any of the gaudy detail of the travelling show. It resembles it only in its dusty and haphazard setting. It is more like a builder's or a tombstone maker's yard. The very letters in which the name of the station is printed are often of a deliberate ugliness. No newspaper would tolerate letters of such an ugliness in its headlines. They stare at one vacuously, joylessly. It is said that the village of Amberley is known to the natives as Amberley, God help us. How many stations look at us from their nameplates with that God help us air? What I should like to see would be a nameplate that would seem to announce to us in passing, Glasgow, thank God, or whatever the name of the station may be. I have never yet discovered a merry station. Here and there a station master has done his best to make the place attractive by planting geraniums in the form of letters to spell the name of the place on a neighboring embankment. But these things remind one of the flowers on a grave, and the people who walk up and down the platform, their noses cold in the wind, are hardly more cheerful than undertakers' men. Even the porters in their green trousers, who roll the milk cans along the platform to the luggage van with an energy and a clatter that would satisfy the ambition of any healthy child, do not look merry. There was one cheerful porter who used to welcome you like a host, and make a jest as he clipped your railway ticket. "Just to lighten your load, sir." But the government had him removed and put to mind gates at a crossing where he would not be able to speak to the passengers. As a rule, however, nobody looks as if he liked being in a railway station or would stop there if he could go anywhere else. I trust the Ministry of Reconstruction will see to it that the railway stations of the country are rebuilt and vivified. One does not really wish to stop at any station at all except one's own station. But if one has to do so, let the stations be made more amusing. Unfortunately, it is not only the frequent stops that have made railway travelling almost ideally uncomfortable. The government seems also to have hired a staff of workers to impregnate the seats of the carriages with dust, and to scatter all the dust that can be spared in these exiguous days on the floors. They also have a gang of old and wheezy gentlemen who travel up and down the line all day shutting the windows. This work is sometimes deputed to women. They are forbidden to say, "May I?" or "Do you mind?" or to make use of any civil expression that might mollify the traveler sitting by the window. It is part of their instructions to reach past him with an air of independence, and to have the window shut and the book that he is reading knocked out of his hand before he has time to see what has happened. Some day someone will write a book about the alteration of English manners that took place during the Great War. I believe the alteration is largely due to these government hirelings whose duty it is to make railway travel a burden and never to say please or thank you. Even now, however, there are compensations. In the morning the shadows are long, and, as one rattles north among the water meadows, the flying plumes of the engine leave a procession of melting silhouettes on the fields to the west. Rooks soar their way towards their homes with long twigs in their beaks. Horses go through the last days of their kingship, dragging plows and harrows over the fields with slow and monotonous tread. Here a hill has been plowed into a sea of little brown waves. Further on a meadow is already bright with the green of winter-sown corn. The country has never been so labored before. Chalk and sound and brown earth and red are all being turned up and broken and bathed in the sun and wind. Adam has begun to delve again. There is the urgency of life in fields long idle. It is not that the fields have become populous. One sees many labored fields, but little labor. The occasional plough horse, however, brings strength into the stillness. How noble a figure of energy he makes! As for us who sit in the railway train, we do not look at him much. We are all either reading papers or talking. Two old men, bearded and greasy-coated, tramps of a bygone era, sit opposite one another and neither read nor talk. One of them is blear-eyed and coughs, and has an unclean mustache. All his friend ever says to him is, "Clean your nose," making an impatient gesture. A young man in a bowler hat and spectacles, who smokes a pipe in inward-drawn lips, discusses the labor situation with some acquaintances. They would be all right, he explains, if it wasn't for the labor leaders. You know what a labor leader is. He's a chap that never did an honest day's work in his life. He finds it pays better to jaw them to work, and I don't blame him. After all, it's human nature. Every man's out to do the best for himself, isn't he? "Your nose, blow your nose," mumbled the tramp across the carriage. "Take Australia," continues the young man. "They've had Labour governments in Australia. What good did they do for the working man? Did they satisfy him? Why, there were more strikes in Australia under the Labour government than there ever had been before." "Did you hear that, Johnny?" I heard another voice saying. "A tame rabbit was sold Saturday in Guildford Market for 12 and 6 pence. How did they know it was a tame one? "Ah, now you're asking." A man looked up from the Morning Post with interest in his face.
"Why," he said, "is a tame rabbit considered to be better eating than a wild one?" It was explained to him that wild rabbits were often kept for a long time after they were killed, and were therefore regarded as more dangerous. Otherwise, the tame rabbit had no point of superiority. "What do you say, Johnny?" Johnny had a fat face and no eyelashes, and wore a muffler instead of a collar. "I say, give me a wild one." The man with the Morning Post went on to talk about rabbits and the price at which he had sold them. At intervals, during everything he said, Johnny kept nodding and saying, with a smile of relish, "Give me a wild one." He said it even when the talk had drifted altogether away from rabbits. He went on repeating it to himself in lower tones, as though at last he had found a thought that suited him. "Municipalization means jobbery," said the young man with the bowler hat. "Look at the county council tramways." "Give me a wild one," said Johnny in a dreamy whisper. "I say, give me a wild one." "Why, it stands to reason, if you have a friend, and you see a chance of shoving him into a job at the public expense." "You'll do it, won't you?" said the young man, addressing the reader of the Morning Post, who merely cleared his throat nervously in answer. "It's human nature," said the young man. "Give me a wild one," whispered Johnny. "I'm afraid there's going to be trouble in Ireland." The man with the Morning Post turned the subject. The young man was ready for him. "There will always be trouble in Ireland," he said, with what the novelists describe as a curl of his lip, "so long as Ireland exists." The tramp continued to mumble about the condition of his friend's nose. Johnny relapsed into silence, and the young man made the man with the Morning Post tremble by a horrible picture of what the country would be like under a Labour government. "It would be all U.P.," he said firmly, "all up. Who would travel in such days, if he could possibly avoid it?" End of In the Train by Robert Lind. Recording by Rosie.
The Island Pool by Henry Van Dyke. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. The Island Pool from Little Rivers. A book of essays in profitable idleness by Henry Van Dyke. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 7. Among the mountains there is a gorge, and in the gorge there is a river, and in the river there is a pool, and in the pool there is an island, and on the island for 4 happy days there was a camp. It was by no means an easy matter to establish ourselves in that lonely place. The river, though not remote from civilization, is practically inaccessible for 9 miles of its course by reason of the steepness of its banks, which are long, shaggy precipices, and the fury of its current, in which no boat can live. We heard its voice as we approached through the forest, and could hardly tell whether it was far away or near. There is a perspective of sound as well as of sight, and one must have some idea of the size of a noise before one can judge of its distance. A mosquito's horn in a dark room may seem like a trumpet on the battlements, and the tumult of a mighty stream heard through an unknown stretch of woods may appear like the babble of a mountain brook close at hand. But when we came out upon the bald forehead of a burnt cliff and looked down, we realized the grandeur and beauty of the unseen voice that we had been following. A river of splendid strength went leaping through the chasm 500 feet below us, and at the foot of 2 snow-white falls, in an oval of dark topaz water, traced with curves of floating foam, lay the solitary island. The broken path was like a ladder. "How shall we ever get down?" sighed Greygown as we dropped from rock to rock, and at the bottom she looked up, sighing, "I know we never can get back again." There was not a foot of ground on the shores level enough for a tent. Our canoe ferried us over, 2 at a time, to the island. It was about 100 paces long, composed of round, coggly stones, with just one patch of smooth sand at the lower end. There was not a tree left upon it larger than an alder bush. The tent poles must be cut far up on the mountain sides, and every bough for our beds must be carried down the ladder of rocks. But the men were gay at their work, singing like mockingbirds. After all, the glow of life comes from friction with its difficulties. If we cannot find them at home, we sally abroad and create them, just to warm up our mettle. The Wananiche in the island pool were superb, astonishing, incredible. We stood on the cobblestones at the upper end, and cast our little flies across the sweeping stream, and for 3 days the fish came crowding in to fill the barrel of pickled salmon for our guide's winter use, and the score rose 12, 21, 32, and the size of the biggest fish steadily mounted. 4 pounds, 4½, 5, 5¾ "Precisely almost 6 pounds," said Ferdinand, holding the scales. "But we may call him 6, monsieur, for if it had been to-morrow that we had caught him, he would certainly have gained the other ounce." And yet, why should I repeat the fisherman's folly of writing down the record of that marvelous catch? We always do it, but we know that it is a vain thing. Few listen to the tale, and none accept it. Does not Christopher North, reviewing the Salmonia of Sir Humphrey Davy, mock and jeer unfeignedly at the fish stories of that most reputable writer? But on the very next page old Christopher himself meanders on into a perilous narrative of the day when he caught a whole cartload of trout in a Highland loch. Incorrigible, happy inconsistency! Slow to believe others, and full of skeptical inquiry, fond man never doubts one thing, that somewhere in the world a tribe of gentle readers will be discovered to whom his fish stories will appear credible. One of our days on the island was Sunday, a day of rest in a week of idleness. We had a few books, for there are some in existence which will stand the test of being brought into close contact with nature. Are not John Burroughs' cheerful, kindly essays full of woodland truth and companionship? Can you not carry a whole library of musical philosophy in your pocket in Matthew Arnold's volume of selections from Wordsworth? And could there be a better sermon for a Sabbath in the wilderness than Mrs. Slosson's immortal story of Fishin' Jimmy? But to be very frank about the matter, the camp is not stimulating to the studious side of my mind. Charles Lamb, as usual, has said what I feel. Quote, "I am not much a friend to out-of-doors reading. I cannot settle my spirits to it." End quote. There are blueberries growing abundantly among the rocks, huge clusters of them, bloomy and luscious as the grapes of Eshcol. The blueberry is nature's compensation for the ruin of forest fires. It grows best where the woods have been burned away and the soil is too poor to raise another crop of trees. Surely it is an innocent and harmless pleasure to wander along the hillsides gathering these wild fruits, as the Master and his disciples once walked through the fields and plucked the ears of corn, never caring what the Pharisees thought of that new way of keeping the Sabbath. And here is a bed of moss beside a dashing rivulet, inviting us to rest and be thankful. Hark! There is a white-throated sparrow on a little tree across the river, whistling his afternoon song, in linked sweetness long drawn out. Down in Maine they call him the Peabody bird, because his notes sound to them like "Old Man Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." In New Brunswick the Scotch settlers say that he sings "Lost, lost, Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy." But here in his northern home, I think we can understand him better. He is singing again and again, with a cadence that never wearies, "Sweet, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." The Canadians, when they came across the sea, remembering the nightingale of southern France, baptized this little gray minstrel their rossignol, and the country ballads are full of his praise. Every land has its nightingale, if we only have the heart to hear him. How distinct his voice is, how personal, how confidential, as if he had a message for us. There is a breath of fragrance on the cool, shady air beside our little stream that seems familiar. It is the first week of September. Can it be that the twin flower of June, the delicate Linnea borealis, is blooming again? Yes, here is the thread-like stem lifting its two frail pink bells above the bed of shining leaves. How dear an early flower seems when it comes back again and unfolds its beauty in a St. Martin's summer. How delicate and suggestive is the faint, magical odor. It is like a renewal of the dreams of youth. "And need we ever grow old?" asked my Lady Greygown, as she sat that evening with the twin flower on her breast, watching the stars come out along the edge of the cliffs and tremble on the hurrying tide of the river. "Must we grow old as well as gray? Is the time coming when all life will be commonplace and practical, and governed by a dull 'of course'? Shall we not always find adventures and romances, and a few blossoms returning, even when the season grows late?" "At least," I answered, "let us believe in the possibility, for to doubt it is to destroy it. If we can only come back to nature together every year and consider the flowers and the birds, and confess our faults and mistakes and our unbelief under these silent stars, and hear the river murmuring our absolution, we shall die young, even though we live long. We shall have a treasure of memories which will be like the twin flower, always a double blossom on a single stem, and carry with us into the unseen world something which will make it worth while to be immortal." 1894. End of The Island Pool by Henry Van Dyke. Recording by Bill Mosley, Bernardo, Texas, USA.
Lead Kindly Light by John Henry Newman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carol Box. LibriVox Coffee Break Selection number 7. Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark, and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. I was not ever thus, nor prayed that thou shouldst lead me on. I love to choose and see my path, but now lead thou me on. I loved the garish day, and spite of fears, pride ruled my will. Remember not past years, so long thy power hath blessed me, sure it still will lead me on. O moor and fen, O crag and torrent, till the night is gone, and with the moon those angel faces smile, which I have loved long since and lost a while. End of Lead Kindly Light by John Henry Newman.
The Motor Bus. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Bus by A.D. Godley, published in Oxford in 1914. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 7. What is this that roareth thus? Can it be a motor bus? Yes, the smell and hideous hum indicat motorem bum. Implet in the corn and high, terror me motoris by. Bo motore clamitabo, ne motore caeda abo. Dative be or ablative, so thou only let us live. Whither shall thy victims flee? Spare us, motor be. Thus I sang, and still and I came in hordes motores by. Et complebat omniforum copia motorum borum. How shall wretches live like us, cincti bis motoribus? Domine, defende nos contra hos motores bos. End of The Motor Bus by A.D. Godley, read by Patrick Wallace.
Selections from Mr. Punch on Tour. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. Selections from Mr. Punch on Tour. Authors unknown. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 7. A Happy Holiday. Now I really do not care a hang about the Riviera. In the daytime you've a gay time, but the nights are very cold. And for any kind of touring which I used to find alluring, I for biking had a liking, but I now have grown too old. Then the constant change of weather, to my thinking, altogether knocked the notion of an ocean trip completely on the head. I've a horror, too, of trippers, Arries, Arriets, and nippers. So a jolly quiet holiday I spent at home in bed. The Travellers' Protection League. The TPL commenced operations last week with regard to the unpunctuality of certain railway companies, and should be encouraged to go a little farther. We want protection against 1. Passengers who try to keep us out of carriages by fictitiously placing hats and wraps on more seats or corners than they will themselves occupy. 2. Passengers who endeavour to enter carriages when we have fictitiously placed hats and wraps on more seats or corners than we shall ourselves occupy. 3. People who smoke bad tobacco in compartments where there are ladies. 4. Ladies who ride in compartments where we smoke bad tobacco. 5. Parties who insist upon having the window open when we wish it shut. 6. Parties who insist upon having the window shut when we wish it open. 7. Persons who try to squeeze in when our carriage is full. 8. Persons who try to keep us out when their carriage is full. 9. Objectionable babies. 10. Objectors to babies. And a job lot of grievances, viz. 11. The British landscape, now consisting of pill advertisements. 12. Clapham Junction. 13. Bank holiday traffic and excursionists, racing and football crowds. 14. The weather. 15. Nasty smelling smoke. 16. Irritatingly uncertain lamps. 17. The increase in the income tax. 18. The cussedness of things in general. 19. And lastly, the $1 billion trust. If the TPL will abate or abolish any or all of these nuisances, we shall be very greatly obliged. Mr. Punch's Country Rambles, with acknowledgments to the Daily Chronicle. A memorable afternoon may be spent by taking the train to Muggleton, and walking from there by way of Mudford, Sloppington, Stickborough-in-the-Marsh, Drencham, St. Swithun's, and Swillingspout, to Poddleton-on-the-Slosh. The whole district is full of memories of the great Hodge family before it migrated into the towns. Quite a number of mute, inglorious Miltons are buried in Poddleton churchyard, but a few people may still be seen in the market-place on Saturdays. Route of ramble. Alighting at Muggleton station, too much reliance should not be placed upon the elocution of the local railway porter. Leave the refreshment room resolutely on the left, as you will need to keep your intelligence clear, and proceed in a nor'-nor'-east half-northerly direction along a winding lane, until Mudford Beacon appears in the rear. Then turn back across 6 meadows and a ploughed field, following alternately the bed of a stream and the right bank of the canal, until Sloppington is reached. From there follow the boundary line between the counties of Mudshire and Slopshire, as far as Stickborough. From 2 to 7 miles further on, according to the best local computation, lies Drencham, where is a remarkable pump. Leaving this landmark south-west by west, veer sharply to the left twice, and pursue a zigzag course. If at the 22nd field you are not within easy reach of Swillingspout, it will be because you are incapable of following this brief chronicle. From the last-named place, the nearest way to Poddleton is through the railway tunnel. It is not public, but persons have sometimes succeeded in getting through. Poddleton is 9 miles from a station, but an omnibus walks the distance occasionally, when the horse is not required for funerals or other purposes. Length of ramble, doubtful, has only been done in sections. The ideal holiday. Come, Phyllis, for the season is already on the wane, and the question of our holiday perplexes once again. Now every jaded Londoner fresh stores of vigour seeks. Our problem is how best to pass these few and fleeting weeks. As one by one each watering place we call to mind in turn, as promptly some objection to each one we discern. Thus Scarborough's too chilly, and Ilfracombe too hot, and this too near, and that too dear, that sandy, and this not. The Alps are always overrun and crowded as Cheapside, and the garlic-reeking south I own I never could abide. The Bards, Aix, Vichy, Taunus, Homburg, Carlsbad, Neuenahr, are either vulgar, crowded, dull, expensive, or too far. Oh, for some new and lone retreat, nor far away nor near, with lovely sights to charm the eye, soft sounds to soothe the ear, where vexed and wearied spirit such as yours and mine might rest, and find in life new purpose, in its joys unwonted zest. Some Aidenn, some Elysium of rapturous delight, where peace should reign unbroken from the dawn to fall of night. Yet since for the impossible in vain we yearn, 'tis clear it will end, no doubt, as usual, in good old Margate dear. A Whitsun holiday, a page from a modern diary. Monday. Up with the lark, breakfast not ready, spent my spare time in closing the boxes, got the family into the train with difficulty, devoted the day to travelling. Reached our destination tired out, glad to get to bed. Tuesday. Up with the lark, did the sights. Had no time to look at anything, as I had to attend to the tickets. Saw all the museums, my party coming out when I had got the catalogues. So managed our visits that there was no opportunity of discussing meals. Got back in time for table d'hôte, but preferred sleep to food. Went to bed. Wednesday. Up with the lark, off again travelling. On the road all day. Having to fit in the corresponding trains, had no leisure for meals. Arrived at our new resting place late at night, so off as quickly as possible to bed. Thursday. Up with the lark. Spent the morning in sightseeing under the customary conditions. Waited upon the family, looked after the catalogues and umbrellas. Food again at a discount, dispensed with dinner. Glad to get to bed. Friday. Up with the lark. Time to return. Back again by a train. No food, no rest. Halfway home. Arrived in time to see the lights being put out. Off to bed. Saturday. Up with the lark. Continued my journey post-haste. Wrote up my diary. Find that I have got ever several hundreds of miles, but for the life of me cannot remember anything that I have seen. Don't recollect any square meal. Back again, tired, and only pleased to be in bed. Sunday, sleeping. Monday, up with the lark, recovered from my week's rest, and glad to get back again to work. End of selections from Mr. Punch on Tour. Authors unknown.
The Pobble Who Has No Toes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by The Story Girl. The Pobble Who Has No Toes by Edward Lear. From Nonsense Books. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, No. 7. The Pobble Who Has No Toes had once as many as we. When they said, "Some day you may lose them all," he replied, "Fish fiddle-dee-dee." And his Aunt Jobiska made him drink lavender water tinged with pink, for she said, "The world in general knows there's nothing so good for a Pobble's toes." The Pobble Who Has No Toes swam across the Bristol Channel, but before he set out he wrapped his nose in a piece of scarlet flannel, for his Aunt Jobiska said, "No harm can come to his toes if his nose is warm, and it's perfectly known that a Pobble's toes are safe, provided he minds his nose." The Pobble swam fast and well, and when boats or ships came near him, he tinkledy-binkledy-winkled a bell, so that all the world could hear him. And all the sailors and admirals cried, when they saw him nearing the further side, "He has gone to fish for his Aunt Jobiska's runcible cat with crimson whiskers." But before he touched the shore of the Bristol Channel, a sea-green porpoise carried away his wrapper of scarlet flannel. And when he came to observe his feet, formerly garnished with toes so neat, his face at once became forlorn on perceiving that all his toes were gone. And nobody ever knew, from that dark day to the present, whoso had taken the Pobble's toes, in a manner so far from pleasant. Whether the shrimps or crawfish grey, or crafty mermaids stole them away, nobody knew, and nobody knows how the Pobble was robbed of twice 5 toes. The Pobble Who Has No Toes was placed in a friendly bark, and they rowed him back and carried him up to his Aunt Jobiska's park. And she made him a feast, at his earnest wish, of eggs and buttercups fried with fish. And she said, "It's a fact the whole world knows, that Pobbles are happier without their toes." End of The Pobble Who Has No Toes by Edward Lear. Read by The Story Girl.
The Anglo-American Polar Expedition. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Anglo-American Polar Expedition, from the National Geographic Magazine. Volume 18, Number 12, December 1907. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 7. The following letter to Hon. O. H. Titterman, Superintendent of the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, describes some of the experiences of the Michelson-Leffingwell expedition and the difficulties encountered by the explorer on the Arctic coast of Alaska. Flaxman Island, Alaska, via Point Barrow, August 16, 1907. Sir, our expedition to Banks Land has wound up here, and I am endeavoring to make the most of the opportunity to add something to the meager knowledge of this region along geodetic and geologic lines. The program I hope to carry out consists of a map of the coast from Demarcation Point to the Coville River, the exploration of 5 rivers not now indicated on the map, 4 of them never visited by white men, and such geological work as I can do. The past year was devoted to expedition affairs, and very little of the 6 months spent in the field was devoted to scientific work, so that to carry out the above program it will be necessary to remain another year. The expedition was supposed to be fitted for 2 years, and we have received some more provisions this summer, but we have used so much of our outfit in the purchase of dogs, furs, and fresh game that by the end of another year we shall be short on a good many things. Consequently, I am sending out for a 3rd year's supply of provisions, coal, etc. A part of the expedition returns this year, and next year I shall be alone and will be compelled to support a native family or 2 for hunters, and to travel with me in the field. Consequently, I am in imperative need of the provisions. The only available way is to ship it in per whaler, at a cost of from $25 to $50 per ton, and even then there is much uncertainty. This summer our staff came in 3 different whaling ships. One landed her share, another had an injured propeller and was in a hurry to get to Herschel Island to have it repaired. The third had our freight buried under some tons of her own goods and refused to land it until she returned in September. A prospector 50 miles east of here, with whom I have been working in the mountains, had all his supplies carried by in a fog and will not get them until September. In view of this uncertainty and of the excessive cost of freight, I wish to have my goods brought up by the revenue cutter Thetis on her annual trip north. She comes each year to Point Barrow, and this island is only 250 miles farther. I have already been at a personal expense of over $8,000 in this expedition, and as I am doing work which would cost the government a large sum to duplicate, I feel that it is not asking too much to have supplies transported by the government. Personally, I have made 1 trip, with mail, to Herschel Island, 2 trips to Baxter Sound, surveying, 1 trip 80 miles into the mountains with pack on back, and spent 2 months on the ice to the north of here, sounding and looking for supposed land. Other members of the expedition have been equally active, our ethnologist having been in the field nearly the whole winter, working from the east mouth of the Mackenzie River to the Corvette. Of course, I am depending upon occultations for longitude, and brought along a 2-inch telescope by Bausch and Lomb. I was at the ship only during 2 lunations, and on account of the almost continual gales succeeded in getting only 1 occultation of a 4.3 magnified star. I followed several smaller ones until nearly the calculated time, but always lost them before they were shut out. Try as I would, I could not keep the frost from my breath, hands, and even body from dimming and blurring the image. I have an alt azimuth by Gartner, of Chicago, with a 12-centimeter circle, graduated by Berger, with which I can get a latitude observation with probable error of plus or minus 1.5 seconds, with a set of 8 pointings. The probable error of our observatory is about plus or minus 0.5 seconds mean of 4 sets. Last winter I had to use a sidereal watch for time observations, and found it very unsatisfactory. Still, the probable error of a time set on 2 stars, east and west, was generally about 0.5 seconds. This last week I have changed our ship's chronometer to sidereal time, and I hope for better work this winter. For work along the coast and sand reefs, I have a small planetable with telescopic alidade furnished with an eyepiece micrometer mounted horizontally. By means of poles set up about 100 meters apart, I can carry a traverse which is to be corrected by latitude and longitude observations every 30 to 40 miles. The longitude I hope to carry toward Demarcation Point by latitude and a triangulation on the mountains to the west. The only way is to use chronometers in September, when the stars begin to show and navigation is still open. Very respectfully, E. de K. Leffingwell. End of The Anglo-American Polar Expedition, from the National Geographic Magazine.
A Girl's Railway Acquaintance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Girl's Railway Acquaintance by Unknown, from Stories Worth Rereading. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 7. A Girl's Railway Acquaintance. Most young people do not adequately realize what consummate address and fair seeming can be assumed by a deceiving stranger, until experience enlightens them, and they suffer for their credulity. The danger, especially to young girls traveling alone, is understood by their parents, and no daughter is safe who disregards their injunction to permit no advances by a new and self-introduced acquaintance, either man or woman. A lady gave, some years ago, in one of the religious papers, an experience of her own when she was a girl, which shows one of the artful ways by which designing men win the confidence of the innocent. Traveling from Boston to New York, she had the company of a girlfriend as far as Springfield. For the rest of the way she was to ride alone, and, as she supposed, unnoticed, save by the watchful conductor, to whose care her father had entrusted her. She was beginning to feel lonely when a gentlemanly-looking man of about 45 approached her seat with an apology, and, by way of question, spoke her name. Surprised, but on her guard, for she remembered her home warnings, she made no reply. But the pleasant stranger went on to say that he was a schoolmate of her mother, whom he called by her girl name. This had its effect. And when he mentioned the names of other persons whom she knew, and begged to hear something of these old friends with whom he once went to school, she made no objection to his seating himself by her side. The man made himself very agreeable, and the young girl of 16 thought how delighted her mother would be to know that she had met one of her old playmates, who said so many complimentary things about her. He talked very tenderly about the loss of his wife, and once went back to his own seat to get a picture of his motherless little girl and a box of bonbons. The conductor passed just then, and asked the young lady if she ever saw that gentleman before. She told him no, but though the question was put very kindly and quietly, it made her quite indignant. As they approached the end of the journey, the man penciled a brief note to her mother on a card, signed what purported to be his name, and gave it to her. Then he asked if he might get her a carriage, provided her uncle, whom she expected, did not meet her, and she assented at once. When the train arrived in New York, and the conductor came and took her travel bag, she was vexed, and protested that the gentleman had promised to look after her. The official told her kindly, but firmly, that her father had put her in his care, and he should not leave her until he had seen her under her uncle's protection, or put her in a carriage himself. She turned for appeal to her new acquaintance, but he had vanished. When she reached home after her visit, and told her experience, and presented the card, her mother said she had never known nor heard of such a man. The stranger had evidently sat within hearing distance of the girl and her schoolmate, and, listening to their merry chatter all the way from Boston to Springfield, had given him the clues to names and localities that enabled him to play his sinister game. Only the faithfulness of the wise conductor saved her from possibilities too painful to be recorded here. Youth's Companion. End of A Girl's Railway Acquaintance by Unknown.
Remedy for Cold Feet in City Cabs. From the Scientific American, Volume 17, Number 26, December 28, 1867. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remedy for Cold Feet in City Cars. Quote, riding downtown these cold mornings in the horse cars, the unpleasant sensation of chilled feet reminds us of the plan adopted in France and other parts of Europe to keep the feet of car passengers warm. This is accomplished by inserting a flattened iron tube along the bottom of the car, lengthwise in the center, between the rows of seats. This tube is raised a little above the floor level of the car to afford a rest for the feet, yet not enough to make a stumbling block. When the car leaves the depot, this tube is filled with hot water from a boiler kept heated for the purpose, and this water retains its heat and gives a pleasant warmth to the feet of the passengers, and the car generally, for about 2 hours, after which the tube is refilled at a convenient station on the road. In the case of our city cars, this might easily be done, and be a cheap and exceedingly comfortable improvement. End quote. Evening Post. It should be understood that the French cars are arranged with small compartments like stagecoaches, and the passengers sit face to face with the warming tube above described under their feet. 1 tube for every 6 persons. We should be glad indeed to see this plan introduced here, but it is not to be expected that our city railroad companies will do anything for the comfort of their passengers, while without such trouble they continue to reap rich harvests. Very likely, the idea of loading a lot of hot water upon their cars for passengers to stand upon would strike them as a good joke. Their poor, broken-down, spavined horses could not stand any additional load. End of Remedy for Cold Feet in City Cars. From Scientific American, Volume 17, Number 26, December 28, 1867, for the LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, Number 7. Read by Availle in August 2011.
Stagecoaching in England. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Stagecoaching in England, Cambridge to Oxford, 112 miles in 12 hours, by Charles E. Bolton. From A Model Village of Homes and Other Papers. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, Number 7. In merry England, the upper classes certainly know how to have pleasure. During the winter months, the 20,000 members of the 300 clubs hunt not less than 4 days a week. Within a few years the old custom of coaching, which steam had forced to the rear, has been brought forward as one of the most delightful summer amusements. One of the charming sights of London, in May, is the turnout of 50 or more elaborate drags of the 4-in-hand and coaching clubs. Royalty, nobility, and gentry furnish the membership. In addition, a score of stagecoaches, owned and driven by gentlemen, make daily excursions into the beautiful and historic suburbs of the city. Foremost of these is the Defiance coach, which runs tri-weekly between the great universities via London. Captain Carlton V. Blythe is sole proprietor, and having travelled widely in America in his tour around the world, he knows how generously to anticipate the wants of those in search of genuine recreation. $50,000 is invested in swift roadsters, 1 to the mile, and in Holland's famous coaches, models of style. While waiting at Cambridge for the time of departure, our 2 hours' walk led us through the majestic quadrangles of Trinity and St. John's Colleges, across the graceful bridges that span the classic Cam, under the grateful shade of long rows of stately elms and fragrant limes, and back into King's Chapel, built 3 centuries ago by the Henrys. Its 14 immense windows of exquisitely painted glass fill the eye with beauty. Portions of Bible history are written in the hues of the rainbow by the earnest hand of faith. The pillars and slender shafts, all tending upward, appear to lose themselves in the bossed network of ribs and fan tracery which strengthen and define the lofty vaulted roof of stone. Standing in silence, the heart is elevated in prayer to God, and fresh inspiration, the evident idea of the builder, is ours. The Defiance had accommodations for 12 passengers outside and 4 inside, besides seats for the driver and guard. We booked for the last seat, a sovereign each, it being Hobson's choice. The passengers included fellows of the colleges and tourists from America and London. The box seat beside the driver was given to a stylish lady. The guard, wearing a scarlet coat with gilt trimmings, blew a long brass horn, and as the clock struck 9, Captain Blythe gathered the reins well in hand, and we were off. Hundreds gathered at Bull's Hotel, bidding us good-bye, and down King's Parade we went, rapidly passing St. Peter's, Pembroke, and Corpus Christi colleges, and upon leaving the famed city the spirited horses broke into a gallop, developing a speed that was rare enjoyment for those who believe in fast driving. The first 6 miles to Harston were made in just 35 minutes, where our heated team was quickly changed for 4 fresh bays, and we pushed on toward London. The roads were heavy from frequent rains, but without ruts, for the Romans, centuries ago, taught the Englishmen how to keep them smooth the year round. Hard limestone, broken small, is kept at convenient distances, and every indication of wear is immediately repaired. Excitement quickened acquaintance, and the passengers talked and joked on innumerable subjects. As an American, we naturally sympathized with the tenant farmer, whose first $5 per acre and more of his scanty income must go to the non-producing landowner. His buildings, with thatched roofs, and children poorly clad, spoke plainly of pinching poverty. The rainfall since March 1st, 5 months, had been nearly 20 inches. His meadows were flooded, and fields of unripe wheat, barley, and oats were everywhere badly lodged. Haying, 60 days behind America, was not half finished. An Englishman said, "All went right while Providence managed the weather, but since the Americans have taken it in hand, they have sent us only beastly storms." So enormous are the importations of produce and meats from America, and they are constantly increasing, that the English farmer need not expect any great future profit from agriculture. Free trade, to be consistent, must also advocate free land. Otherwise entailment may wreck the English Empire. In less than 3 hours we rode 28 miles, through Royston, where King James I had a hunting lodge, out of Cambridgeshire into Hertford County, and on to Wade's Mill, where we gladly halted for a 10-minute lunch. Americans, accustomed to leave on their office door, "Gone to dinner, return in 5 minutes," did ample justice to hot mutton joint, etc., much to the surprise of Englishmen, who require a full hour. Passing Ware and Edmonton, we are reminded of the ludicrous ride of Cooper's John Gilpin from London on his wedding day. At Waltham we came to one of several crosses which Edward I erected to commemorate the worth of his beautiful queen, Eleanor. She died in 1290 at Harley, and a cross was built wherever the sad procession stopped en route to Westminster Abbey. The 7th stage, or relay, brought us to Tottenham High Cross, and 4 beautiful greys carried us 10 miles south, through the suburbs into London. Pretty villas and cottages line the roads, their unique architecture giving exquisite effect, as ivy, Virginia creeper, or roses partially or entirely cover walls, roofs, and chimneys. We began to feel the throb of the mighty metropolis as the mellow notes of the horn cleared the crowded streets while we hurried through Camden Town, Portland Place, and Regent Street. As Big Ben in the Parliament Tower struck 3, we turned into Piccadilly, and pulled up at Hatchett's famous White Horse Hotel with half our journey made. After a 20-minute lunch and several changes in our passenger list, 4 sleek black horses took us westward past the Marble Arch and along Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens, over the Bayswater Road, and out of Middlesex County into Buckinghamshire. Surely no country in the world affords so many lovely landscape views. The grass of the British Isles is always fresh and green, the lawns having a peculiar velvety softness. The foliage of elm, ash, beech, oak, lime, and sycamore, scattered everywhere most artistically, is rich in quantity and colour. The evergreen hawthorn and holly, white with blossom in springtime, and red with berries in the fall, enclose luxuriant crops and pasturage. The pastures abound in groups of pretty sheep, some with black faces and feet, others with long curly fleeces; also choicest breeds of cattle, the white and red shading into each other in every conceivable variety. We no longer wonder at Rosa Bonheur's intense love for domestic animals. Ivy and moss cover the homes of rich and poor alike, and characteristic spires and antique towers spring constantly into view, making the ride in any direction extremely picturesque. The barley fields were all aglow with the scarlet poppy intermixed. The daisies which Wordsworth loved, and an occasional Scottish bluebell, beautified the roadside. Approaching Gerrard Cross, we drove through fields brightened with the tiny purple heather. Before the twilight ended, which in summer continues in England till after 9 o'clock, we had passed on our left the immense estates of the Duke of Somerset, Lord Carrington, and Lady Dashwood. On our left lay the country seat of Lord Beaconsfield. Men, women, and children in nearly 30 villages had now cheered on the Defiance, and driving into Tetsworth, the people sang out, "You are late, Captain." "Yes, I know it," he replied. "Hurry up the horses and lanterns. We have yet 12 miles to make in 60 minutes." Already 56 horses had done their work. In less than 3 minutes the fresh animals were on the gallop. The brakes were put on, but down grade they ran, their steel-corked shoes striking fire, while the sparks flashed from the friction on the wheels. 6 miles were scored in 25 minutes. The last 4 of the 64 horses were at their task. The darkness of a starlight night, requiring frequent blasts of the horn to keep the road clear, made the race into Oxford most exciting. This was the 129th trip of the season, and the Defiance had not yet been a minute late. The ambitious horses were now crowded to their utmost. Passengers clung to their seats and hats, and held their breath, while the horn announced our coming. High Street reached, we fairly flew past All Souls and Queen's Colleges. Ahead, the streets were crowded with 1,000 anxious citizens. As the clock, in full sight on the old tower of St Mary's Church, struck 9, we came to a stop in front of the Mitre Hotel, and the enthusiastic crowd gave hearty cheers for the success of English coaching. Captain Blythe was ably assisted in driving by special coachman Edwin Founds and the genial guard Henry Cracknell, both experienced in coaching, and their fathers as well. The Defiance coach makes over 15,000 miles for the season. General Putnam's ride may have been more dangerous, Horace Greeley's down the Sierra Nevadas around more sharp curves, Lady Godiva's more embarrassing, but no ride could be more enjoyable than ours from Cambridge to Oxford. End of Stagecoaching in England by Charles E. Bolton.
The Star Treader by Clark Ashton Smith. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. The Star Treader by Clark Ashton Smith. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 7. 1. A voice cried to me in a dawn of dreams, saying, "Make haste, the webs of death and birth are brushed away, and all the threads of earth wear to the breaking, spaceward gleams, thine ancient pathway of the suns, whose flame is part of thee, and deeps outreach immutably, whose largeness runs through all thy spirit's mystery. Go forth and tread unharmed the blaze of stars wherethrough thou camest in old days. Pierce without fear each fast whose hugeness crushed thee not within the past. A hand strikes off the chains of time, a hand swings back the door of years. Now fall earth's bonds of gladness and of tears, and open the strait dream to space sublime. 2. Who rides a dream? What hand shall stay? What eye shall note, or measure meet his passage on a purpose fleet, the thread and weaving of his way? It caught me from the clasping world, and swept beyond the brink of sense. My soul was flung, and poised, and whirled, like to a planet, chained and hurled, with solar lightning, strong, intense, swift as communicated rays that leap from severed suns, a gloom within whose wastes no suns illume. The winged dreams fulfilled its ways, through years reversed and lit again. I followed that unending chain, wherein the suns are links of light, retraced through lineal, ordered spheres, the twisting of the threads of years, in weavings wrought of noon and night. Through stars and deeps I watched the dream unroll, those folds that form the raiment of the soul. 3. In kindling dawns of memory, each sun had radiance to relume a sealed, disused, and darkened room within the soul's immensity. Their alien ciphers shone and lit. I understood what each had writ upon my spirit's scroll. Again I wore mine ancient lives, and knew the freedom and the gyves that formed and marked my soul. 4. I delved in each forgotten mind, the units that had builded me, whose deepnesses before were blind and formless as infinity, knowing again each former world, from planet unto planet world, through gulfs that mightily divide, like to an intervital sleep. One world I found, where souls abide, like winds that rest upon a rose. Thereto they creep, to loose all burden of old woes. And one I knew, where warp of pain is woven in the soul's attire, and one where with new loveliness is strengthened beauty's olden shame, soft as a sound and keen as fire, in light no darkness may depress. 5. Where no terrestrial dreams had trod, my vision entered undismayed, and life her hidden realms displayed to me as to a curious god, where colored suns of systems triplicate bestow on planets weird, ineffable, green light that orbs them like an outer sea, and large auroral noons that alternate with skies like sunset held without abate. Life's touch renewed incomprehensibly the strains of mirth and grief's harmonious spell. Dead passions, like to stars relit, shone in the gloom of ways forgot. Where crownless gods in darkness sit, the day was full on altars hot. I heard, once more a part of it, the central music of the Pleiades, and to Alcyone my soul, swayed with the stars that own her song's control, unchallenged, glad I trod, a revenant in worlds Edenic longly lost, or walked in spheres that sing to these, o'er space no light has crossed. diverse as hell's mad antiphony, uptossed to heaven's angelic chant. 6. What vasts the dream went out to find! I seemed beyond the world's recall, in gulfs where darkness is a wall, to render strong Antares blind. In unimagined spheres I found the sequence of my being's round, some life where firstling meed of song, the strange imperishable leaf, was placed on brows that starry grief had crowned and pain anointed long. Some avatar where love sang like the last great star at morn, ere death filled all its sky. Some life in fresher years unworn, upon a world whereof peace was a robe like to the calms that lie on pools aglow with latter spring. There life's pellucid surface took clear image of all things, nor shook till touch of death's obscuring wing. Some earlier awakening in pristine years when giant strife of forces darkly whirled, first forged the thing called life, hot from the furnace of the suns, upon the anvil of a world. 7. Thus knew I those anterior ones, whose lives in mine were blent, till lo, my dream, that held a night where regal sends no word of might, was emptied of the trodden stars, and dwindled to the sun's extent, the brain's familiar prison bars, and raiment of the sorrow and the mirth, wrought by the shuttles intricate of earth. End of The Star Treader by Clark Ashton Smith.
Third Class in Indian Railways. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Third Class in Indian Railways by Mohandas Gandhi. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 7. I have now been in India for over 2 years and a half after my return from South Africa. Over 1/4 of that time I have passed on the Indian trains traveling third class by choice. I have traveled up north as far as Lahore, down south up to Tranquebar, and from Karachi to Calcutta. Having resorted to third class traveling, among other reasons for the purpose of studying the conditions under which this class of passengers travel, I have naturally made as critical observations as I could. I have fairly covered the majority of railway systems during this period. Now and then I have entered into correspondence with the management of the different railways about the defects that have come under my notice, but I think that the time has come when I should invite the press and the public to join in a crusade against a grievance which has too long remained unredressed, though much of it is capable of redress without great difficulty. On the 12th instant I booked at Bombay for Madras by the mail train and paid rupees 13.9. It was labelled to carry 22 passengers. These could only have seating accommodation. There were no bunks in this carriage whereon passengers could lie with any degree of safety or comfort. There were 2 nights to be passed in this train before reaching Madras. If not more than 22 passengers found their way into my carriage before we reached Poona, it was because the bolder ones kept the others at bay. With the exception of 2 or 3 insistent passengers, all had to find their sleep being seated all the time. After reaching Raipur, the pressure became unbearable. The rush of passengers could not be stayed. The fighters among us found the task almost beyond them. The guards or other railway servants came in only to push in more passengers. A defiant Memon merchant protested against this packing of passengers like sardines. In vain did he say that this was his 5th night on the train. The guard insulted him and referred him to the management at the terminus. There were during this night as many as 35 passengers in the carriage during the greater part of it. Some lay on the floor in the midst of dirt, and some had to keep standing. A free fight was at one time avoided only by the intervention of some of the older passengers who did not want to add to the discomfort by an exhibition of temper. On the way, passengers got for tea tannin water with filthy sugar and a whitish-looking liquid miscalled milk, which gave this water a muddy appearance. I can vouch for the appearance, but I cite the testimony of the passengers as to the taste. Not during the whole of the journey was the compartment once swept or cleaned. The result was that every time you walked on the floor, or rather cut your way through the passengers seated on the floor, you waded through dirt. The closet was also not cleaned during the journey, and there was no water in the water tank. Refreshments sold to the passengers were dirty-looking, handed by dirtier hands, coming out of filthy receptacles and weighed in equally unattractive scales. These were previously sampled by millions of flies. I asked some of the passengers who went in for these dainties to give their opinion. Many of them used choice expressions as to the quality, but were satisfied to state that they were helpless in the matter. They had to take things as they came. On reaching the station, I found that the gariwala would not take me unless I paid the fare he wanted. I mildly protested and told him I would pay him the authorized fare. I had to turn passive resistor before I could be taken. I simply told him he would have to pull me out of the gari or call the policeman. The return journey was performed in no better manner. The carriage was packed already, and but for a friend's intervention I could not have been able to secure even a seat. My admission was certainly beyond the authorized number. This compartment was constructed to carry 9 passengers, but it had constantly 12 in it. At one place, an important railway servant swore at a protestant, threatened to strike him, and locked the door over the passengers whom he had with difficulty squeezed in. To this compartment there was a closet, falsely so called. It was designed as a European closet, but could hardly be used as such. There was a pipe in it, but no water, and I say without fear of challenge that it was pestilentially dirty. The compartment itself was evil-looking. Dirt was lying thick upon the woodwork, and I do not know that it had ever seen soap or water. The compartment had an exceptional assortment of passengers. There were 3 stalwart Punjabi Mohammedans, 2 refined Tamilians, and 2 Mohammedan merchants who joined us later. The merchants related the bribes they had to give to procure comfort. One of the Punjabis had already traveled 3 nights and was weary and fatigued, but he could not stretch himself. He said he had sat the whole day at the central station, watching passengers giving bribe to procure their tickets. Another said he had himself to pay rupees 5 before he could get his ticket and his seat. These 3 men were bound for Ludhiana and had still more nights of travel in store for them. What I have described is not exceptional but normal. I have got down at Raipur, Dond, Sonepur, Chakradarpur, Purulia, Asansol, and other junction stations, and been at the Musafirkhanas attached to these stations. They are discreditable-looking places where there is no order, no cleanliness, but utter confusion and horrible din and noise. Passengers have no benches or not enough to sit on. They squat on dirty floors and eat dirty food. They are permitted to throw the leavings of their food and spit where they like, sit how they like, and smoke everywhere. The closets attached to these places defy description. I have not the power adequately to describe them without committing a breach of the laws of decent speech. Disinfecting powder, ashes, or disinfecting fluids are unknown. The army of flies buzzing about them warns you against their use. But a third-class traveler is dumb and helpless. He does not want to complain, even though to go to these places may be to court death. I know passengers who fast while they are traveling just in order to lessen the misery of their life in the trains. At Sonepur, flies having failed, wasps have come forth to warn the public and the authorities, but yet to no purpose. At the imperial capital, a certain third-class booking office is a black hole fit only to be destroyed. Is it any wonder that plague has become endemic in India? Any other result is impossible, where passengers always leave some dirt where they go and take more on leaving. On Indian trains alone, passengers smoke with impunity in all carriages, irrespective of the presence of the fair sex and irrespective of the protest of non-smokers. And this notwithstanding a bylaw which prevents a passenger from smoking without the permission of his fellows in the compartment which is not allotted to smokers. The existence of the awful war cannot be allowed to stand in the way of the removal of this gigantic evil. War can be no warrant for tolerating dirt and overcrowding. One could understand an entire stoppage of passenger traffic in a crisis like this, but never a continuation or accentuation of insanitation and conditions that must undermine health and morality. Compare the lot of the first-class passengers with that of the third class. In the Madras case, the first-class fare is over 5 times as much as the third-class fare. Does the third-class passenger get 1/5, even 1/10 of the comforts of his first-class fellow? It is but simple justice to claim that some relative proportion be observed between the cost and comfort. It is a known fact that the third-class traffic pays for the ever-increasing luxuries of first- and second-class traveling. Surely a third-class passenger is entitled at least to the bare necessities of life. In neglecting the third-class passengers, opportunity of giving a splendid education to millions in orderliness, sanitation, decent composite life, and cultivation of simple and clean tastes is being lost. Instead of receiving an object lesson in these matters, third-class passengers have their sense of decency and cleanliness blunted during their traveling experience. Among the many suggestions that can be made for dealing with the evil here described, I would respectfully include this. Let the people in high places, the viceroy, the commander-in-chief, the rajas, maharajas, the imperial counselors, and others, who generally travel in superior classes, without previous warning go through the experiences now and then of third-class traveling. We would then soon see a remarkable change in the conditions of third-class traveling, and the uncomplaining millions will get some return for the fares they pay under the expectation of being carried from place to place with ordinary creature comforts. End of Third Class in Indian Railways by Mohandas Gandhi.
The Fable of the Unintentional Heroes of Centreville. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. The Fable of the Unintentional Heroes of Centreville, from Fables in Slang by George Ade. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection number 7. In Centreville there lived 2 husky young fellows named Bill and Schuyler, commonly abbreviated Sky. They did not find any nourishing excitement in a grain elevator, so they enlisted to free Cuba. The government gave each of them a slouch hat and a prehistoric firearm. They tied red handkerchiefs round their necks and started for the front, each with his head out of the car window. They gave the Sioux yell to everybody along the track between Centreville and Tampa. While in camp, they played double PD, smoked corncob pipes, and cussed the rations. They referred to the President of these United States as Mac, and spoke of the beloved Secretary of War as Old Alger. After more or less delay, they went aboard a boat and were landed in Cuba, where they began to shoot at everything that looked foreign. The hot rain drenched them, and the tropical sun steamed them. They had mud on their clothes, and had to sleep out. When they were unusually tired and hungry, they would sing coon songs and roast the War Department. At last they were ordered home. On the way back, they didn't think of anything except their two lady friends who worked in the Centreville steam laundry. They rode into town with a machete under each arm and their pockets full of Mauser cartridges. The first thing they saw when they alighted from the train was a brass band. It began to play, "See the Conquering Hero Comes." Then 8 little girls in white began to strew flowers in their pathway. The artillery company ripped out a salute. Cap Gibbs, who won his title by owning the first steam thrashing machine ever seen in the county, confronted them with a red, white, and blue sash around him. He barked in a loud voice. It was something about Old Glory. Afterward, the Daughters of the Revolution took them in tow and escorted them to Pythian Hall, where they were given fried chicken, veal loaf, deviled eggs, crullers, preserved watermelon, cottage cheese, sweet pickles, grape jelly, soda biscuit, stuffed mangoes, lemonade, hickory nut cake, cookies, cinnamon roll, lemon pie, ham, macaroons, New York ice cream, apple butter, Charlotte Russe, peppermint wafers, and coffee. While they were feeding, the Sons of Veterans Quartet stood on the rostrum with their heads together and sang, "Tenting tonight, tenting tonight, tenting on the old campground." At the first opportunity, Bill motioned to Schuyler and led him into the anteroom where they kept the regalia, the kindling wood, and the mop. "Say, Sky, what the Sam Hill does this mean?" he asked. "Are we heroes?" "That's what everybody says." "Do you believe it?" "No matter what I believe, I'm going to let 'em have their own way. I may want to run for supervisor someday." Moral: if it is your play to be a hero, don't renege. End of The Fable of the Unintentional Heroes of Centreville by George Ade. Recording by Bill Mosley, Bernardo, Texas, USA.
Visit to Kentucky. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Visit to Kentucky by Alexander Clark From the Old Log Schoolhouse. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 7. Toward the close of the fair month of May, we started on a short summer tour among the homes and schools of Kentucky and Tennessee. Our way led us over the Pennsylvania Central Railroad amid its thousand picturesque scenes, and its unrivaled comforts and conveniences to the traveler. Tourists will be repaid 100-fold by passing this way, among the rich farms of eastern Pennsylvania, along the romantic Susquehanna, the winding valley of the Blue Juniata, and then to climb the lofty Allegheny Mountains by steam, and on and away over the western slope, down the wild Conemaugh, until the beautiful Ohio appears beyond the smoke and dust of the Iron City, is truly grand. From Pittsburgh's noise and soot, we continued our journey westward, over the prompt and well-managed Fort Wayne and Chicago extension of the great Central Railroad. Loitering a day or two at the dear old homestead among the hills of Ohio, with father, mother, sister, brother, where in days gone by we so often mingled our voices, our hopes, our fears, and our loves. What sacred memories associate with the orchard, the meadow, the deep-tangled wildwood, and every loved spot which our infancy knew. But those days of endearing union and communion as an unbroken family, when all our aims were one, when the same humble cabin roof sheltered us every one from all the outer world's storm and strife, when the only center and charm of each life were blended in the sweet thought of home, those happy days have fled forever. Yet the privilege of meeting, even seldom, now, with the loved ones at home, to talk of our varied pursuits and prospects in the world, and to join hearts in the one cherished hope of a home in heaven at last, makes it a joyous time for us all together. There is not much time for observation while hurrying along by steam over hill and dale, valley, plain, and broad prairie, and 3 days of this journeying onward, singing through the forest, rattling over bridges, shooting under arches, running over ridges, brought us, by way of Chicago, Lafayette, and Louisville, to the quaint and quiet little city of Frankfort, the capital of Kentucky. During our stay in Frankfort, we enjoyed the company of the children at a grand picnic, close by a cool, gushing spring, whose pure waters leap from the rockside beneath the shade of ancestral elms and sycamores near the banks of the Kentucky River. From 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 in the evening, the old woods rang with music and with mirth, outspringing from the hearts of hundreds of exultant children. The ample and delicious dinner brought in baskets and eaten from a table of grass, the bright sparkling water from the spring, the songs, the plays, the speeches, the jokes, the frolic, and the fun, all, as free as the winds they were. And not until the far-reaching shadows of evening had gathered the silvery ripples from the surface of the river, and hushed to silence the warblings of the birds around, did we turn our faces homeward. That was indeed a jubilant day, and never shall its delights be forgotten. But the heart may not always be glad. There are times of pensive sorrow, and in the evening of our gala day the hours brought silent and solemn lessons, when in company with a few young friends we visited the cemetery at Frankfort by moonlight. It was a calm, sweet summer's evening, such as would inspire any soul with purest emotions. The location of the cemetery is on the summit of a hill that rises abruptly from the right bank of the Kentucky River, close above the town. The entire bluff, from the river shore to the summit, is densely covered with trees, bushes, and vines, forming an almost perpendicular mountain wall of foliage. Within the enclosure, nature and art have blended their handiwork to form a most lovely resting place for the dead. White monuments of the purest marble rise up among evergreens, shrubs, and flowers. The pale moonbeams shone downward through the darkened leaves, and touched, in quiet tenderness, the placid waters of the river far below. They lingered in loving nearness to the smooth white headstones here and there, but they seemed to rest more gently upon the little green graves under the cedars. Oh, the moonbeams were angel smiles. The zephyrs of night were angel whispers, breathing holy vespers over the graves of loved ones sweetly sleeping. Near the edge of this garden of graves, and overlooking the clear flowing river below, is the grave of Daniel Boone. His only monument is an appropriate surrounding of rocks and forest trees, so arranged by art as to represent the wildness of an unbroken wilderness. While we stood beside this grave and looked away up toward the full moon, we could see the topmost boughs of the tall firs and cedars waving to and fro very gently, stirred by the soft airs of summer night. It was a tender but touching symbol of life, eternal life, for the living branches waved, and their leaves were ever green. Rest on, thou honored slumberer in the tomb. Thy life was one of care and of conflict. For these hills and valleys, now the homes of the thousands who revere thy memory, were once the dark and bloody ground. And when we all shall have slept like thee for a short night beneath the clay, may we rise to a fairer land above, where no savage foes molest or make afraid. We made a second visit to the cemetery on a Sabbath afternoon, in the company of a kind friend and his beloved children, whose peaceful home was ours while we were at Frankfort, and were more than ever impressed with the surprising beauty of the place. It speaks for the finer feelings of the people to see such adornment in these streets and walks, and around the dwellings of the inhabitants of the sad and silent city on the hill. Never, in all our travels, have we received more genuine kindness and good cheer than from the hands and hearts of the Kentuckians. The stranger is at home wherever he may chance to wander in their midst, and to anyone who goes among them as a friend, and with an honest purpose, the most hearty welcome will be extended. End of Visit to Kentucky by Alexander Clark.